Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my game week 1 defenders cheat sheet. We're kind of looking at a lot of changes for FPL this season. DEFCON is the biggest impact in terms of how we value defenders. I think it'll also have a future impact in how we look at rotation for defenders. In the past, when we looked at defenders, the way we actually approached rotation was actually thinking about expected clean sheets for the most part, because, generally speaking, you don't really go for defenders for attacking threat. Clean sheet odds are always higher than, for example, the odds of an attacker getting an attacking return. There's only a few defenders who might have ever broken that rule. And equally, on top of that, generally, if you have a tough game, in theory, where the clean sheet odds are low, the chances of you getting an attacking return are usually quite low, right? Just the idea that good teams are good in both aspects of the game. Obviously, we have some teams more tilted towards defense, more tilted towards offense, but DEFCON doesn't really just subscribe to the idea of whether you're a good defense or not. I think it's very much a playstyle thing. And I think before we even jump into almost looking at the defenders, I just wanted to mention that a lot of the advanced data supported by the defenders cheat sheet is all provided from the OptiStats tool that I have for Fantasy Football Hub. So have a look at the link in the description below to get access to Fantasy Football Hub. They've also gotten their Rate Your Team feature out just now. I plan to do an updated draft. I don't plan on sending an updated draft towards the YouTube audience every single day, because I do want to sort of respect the idea that we're using information. I'm almost looking at modeling how the CBIT and the CBRITs, obviously from the defense and other positions, will impact teams, and I'm looking at how models are sort of interpreting them. And I think my updated draft, when it comes, will take that into account. I'll also play with a couple of draft concepts just to sort of cater to some sort of ideas that I think a lot of people have. So feel free to leave them in the suggestion below, as well as do sort of rate your draft type series as we go through, especially with the hub tool now being live. Let's jump into the cheat sheet. So I think the most important thing to get started with is, expected clean sheets are still probably the most reasonable way to get guarantees of points from a defender, but DEFCON I think is massive. And I think people are underrating it when they think about how getting DEFCON is some sort of long-term concept. It's not, right? It's the same logic really as a clean sheet, right? You've got usually every single week, there's only a few teams within the league, 3 to 4 teams any single week that have above 50% chance of getting a clean sheet. There are, however, some players in the game that actually average enough DEFCON or CBITs here in the defender's case to be able to meet that threshold of 10 at least more than 50% of the time. So there's a huge guarantee in that influx of points. And once the weeks go by, that racks up a lot, especially if you plan to play these defenders. The main thing with DEFCON, though, is that DEFCON is not something, as I said, that is correlated perfectly towards the quality defense. So one thing that I'm trying to understand a little bit more is what situations DEFCON is created. And I think a lot of this is almost these kind of high intensity teams that allow for turnovers of the ball on both ends of the pitch. Ultimately, they also lead to DEFCONs for their opponents, right? So a lot of the teams that actually end up being quite high on this list for sort of team DEFCON actually are probably quite good at giving their opponents DEFCON too. Just, I think if you almost think about a football match as, exchange of chances, it's a team like Man City doesn't really give the opponents many chances to pounce on certain things. Even though, for example, when FPL launched DEFCON, they used a video of Tarkowski getting, more than 10 CBIT in a game versus Man City. I don't think that that's, supposed to give people a bit of insight thinking that DEFCON is almost correlated to tough matches. I think it's very much based on the quality of the opponent. The more that the ball is turned over within certain circumstances, the better for both teams who are able to almost rack up this sort of DEFCON. So I think naturally what I can say about DEFCON is teams like Crystal Palace, teams like Nottingham Forest, Everton, I think we have more than enough comfort, and Bournemouth as well, in particular, that they will sort of do the same as they did last season. With Brentford, I think Thomas Frank leaving is significant. I think with West Ham, I'm not so sure, and I probably need to look into this myself as to how impactful Potter is, and I think I can say the same with Wolves and Pereira. Otherwise, I think the other teams aren't particularly interesting in this list, but we know that Tottenham, for example, can radically change potentially under a new manager. The other teams in this list aren't great, but there are still unique, I think, single defenders within some of these teams that, as I've mentioned for my CBIT analysis, and as you'll see in the cheat sheet video, that do very, very well. The other sort of team piece in terms of how team stats almost drive, I guess, analytical numbers like clean sheet odds is very significant, right? So the defender FDR, which sort of plays on the FDR video that I used previously, we almost have a kind of clean sheet model here over the fixtures. I'm also looking ahead, of course, not only at the next 3 fixtures, but more so towards the first 6 for a lot of teams. I'm anticipating also that a lot of people will do early wildcards. So of course, there's a decayed approach here in terms of the clean sheets, but generally speaking, of course, your usual suspects of good defenses will be high up on this list. And then some teams actually have exceptionally good fixtures, like, for example, Forest, like a Chelsea, for example, even an Everton to an extent. So that's going to be sort of the introduction on a team sort of aspect. The defensive FDR, I would say, is something that's very important to start the season, because even though DEFCON is this sort of shiny new toy, it's still 2 points versus what clean sheets can sometimes give you, which is the 4 points, right? And I think that's very significant. So without further ado, let's actually jump into the Defenders cheat sheet. If you've never seen the cheat sheet series before, it's effectively a tier list of all players and all price points in all positions. As we start with the preseason, we're almost looking at one position at a time, but eventually the cheat sheet series, as we go forward within FPL, will just be looking at all positions, and it'll be a 30-minute video every week or less, recapping kind of how I feel the pecking order of different positions and prices are for different players. Starting with the defenders, I think the 4 million defenders are pretty worthless to talk about. I don't really think that there's any need at all to go for 4 million defenders, in my personal opinion. Yes, there might be some defenders here who can actually get you some decent CBIT, but or CBIT rather, but you actually would want to have, in my opinion, defenses that will actually have reasonable chances of getting clean sheets as well. And 4.0, I think there's a huge drop off here with these sort of promoted teams versus what you can get from some of the 4.5 players. And that's my last assessment. I think Reynaldo could be interesting, just because maybe some of the fixtures opening are okay. And if you're targeting a wild card, or let's say if you want to go Goodmanson, for example, and you want to target a bench boost 1, I kind of get the idea, but there's not a lot of permanence towards picking someone in these positions, especially when some of these 4.5 players can be excellent rotation options. The next piece is going to be the 4.5 tier, and I think there's a lot of good picks here. What does stick out is that Konsa, of course, isn't amazing at CBIT per 90, and that's a little bit of a dampener, but Aston Villa do really have a great run of games to start the season, and I think that does give Konsa some inherent value. But those numbers are very low, and I think it goes back to the idea of when you look at those team-based numbers, Aston Villa, a team like Arsenal, a team like Man City are actually very, very low on that sort of list. So not too surprising to see that Konsa is quite low here. On the flip side, though, Richards is absolutely amazing for CBIT per 90, and that means very, very good things, right? Crystal Palace don't actually have a great run of games to start, but you potentially have someone who's actually, could be used as a rotation piece. So you don't really need to be starting someone like Richards every single game, which means I think Richards is just going to be a really good permanent pick. Wan-Bissaka is someone that I've added here. He was the sort of highest point scoring 4.5 defender in the game, but actually, if you almost backdated the CBIT last season, Wan-Bissaka would not have done this. However, I think West Ham do have some pretty good games to start the season. I would still sort of rate him in that green tier. And I think there's also scope to say, maybe the numbers under West Ham for last season aren't fully reflective of Wan-Bissaka, right? Maybe it's the case that actually the numbers under Potter could actually almost get better and get back to what it was in previous years, where Wan-Bissaka was actually generally really good at CBIT per 90. In terms of Tete, the very interesting thing is actually the Fulham fullbacks, from what I can see, are really good at CBIT per 90. And I think that was actually the case with Timothy Castagne as well. That was also the case with even Sessegnon, although Sessegnon does play slightly different positions for Fulham. But that general trend kind of tells me, tactically at least, there's something that the way that Fulham utilize, I guess, the back four and how their fullbacks almost play within the team, that suggests they're very good for CBIT compared to a lot of other teams and a lot of players where you'll see, and this cheat sheet will be reflective of this, but the idea that center backs are much better in terms of FPL at this moment in time over the sort of extremely attacking fullback, in my opinion. But there are still fullbacks that sort of buck this trend, and I think as long as you're significantly attacking as a fullback, you're always going to have good value, especially if you're underpriced, or at least if your minutes are nailed, right? So I'm thinking of more of the premium type players, but we'll get onto them in a moment. So I think those 4 players are sort of my top tier options. I think there's just an asterisk here. I think he really should be green if he's going to play for this Crystal Palace team, but he's going to be yellow for now because I think unsure as to where he's going to go. If he goes towards a team like Liverpool, for example, he's probably going to rotate a bit more this season. I can't see the value towards Guehi necessarily. Kilman was actually really good for CBIT and also just absolute nailedness for this West Ham team. So he almost represents the best of both worlds in terms of he might even be better than Wan-Bissaka. And I think a lot of people might refuse to believe this, but the idea that if Kilman is much better at CBIT, I think people need to just get with the program, I suppose, and accept that center backs might actually just be better to consistently sort of produce returns and points. Yes, of course, Wan-Bissaka is most likely capable of creating a higher point scoring ceiling within a single game week, but it's also nothing to say that for the weeks that you own Wan-Bissaka, he's going to do that, right? It's actually extremely unlikely to even reach that sort of threshold. And his underlying stats aren't stratospherically good, right? So the XAG per 90 for someone like Wan-Bissaka was not great, and he almost doubled the I guess expected return he should have had. But of course, I think the big thing in Wan-Bissaka is sort of recognizing that he had a pretty transformational season in terms of being an attacking player and sort of establishing himself as one. Udogi is also quite interesting because I think the CBIT numbers are really positive. They're actually better than Van de Ven, and I think as long as he's nailed, he's going to be a really good pick. And part of this too is also almost buying into the idea, I guess, that Spurs are going to be a much better team. I think they have an amazing game week 1 fixture, but then the fixtures are also not that good, right? The expected clean sheets I wouldn't say are absolutely stellar for Spurs, and when I look towards the other sort of end with Pinnock, I think there's big question marks that we can justifiably have on a team like Brentford, but you still have this incredible baseline with CBIT with Pinnock. With De Kuyper, I actually think the Brighton fixtures are way too bad. Yes, of course, the XAG it's a joke, right? But he still has to translate these numbers towards the Premier League, and I think I don't really necessarily see Brighton moving towards a back 5. So that's going to diminish almost his role within the team. Yes, Estupiñán leaving is going to be huge for De Kuyper's minutes, but I would just think he's quite an easy wait and see, right? We know he's going to be a hidden gem at one point in the season. Play him and probably own him when the fixtures are a bit better. I think Brighton's fixtures are just too poor. In the next tier, in the 5 million tier, I think Nico Williams is actually the best 5 million defender. I'm happy to sort of live on that hill. I'm not happy to do the opposite, but Nico Williams is a mixture of everything, right? He's got really, really high CBIT numbers. He actually has really good attacking underlying stats for his price point. And the start of the season for Nottingham Forest is absolutely incredible. I really don't think it's a bad idea altogether to maybe consider even doubling up on a team like Nottingham Forest. I was actually previously rejecting, or at many points in the season, I didn't own Nottingham Forest defense, but I actually think for the price point that some of their players are, considering the opening run of the fixture, considering the opening run of fixtures for the season, I actually think that it makes a lot of sense to probably be invested into these Nottingham Forest players as well. So that's kind of my position. As far as someone like Colwill, I think this is purely expected clean sheets, not too much attacking value whatsoever, not too much CBIT as well. But when the fixtures are that good, someone at 5 million is going to be worth that price. I think, for example, when you look at someone like Sanchez, he's going to have a lot of value necessarily too. So probably something to look at as well. And one of the things that I'll probably mention when it comes to, let's say, defenders is I've mentioned that DEFCON is going to change the way we think about rotating defenders. But when I think about, let's say, the price point of certain players and we look at expected clean sheets, I think goalkeepers are probably still going to subscribe to the general concept, of course, of rotating for clean sheets. And right now, at the sort of 5 million price point, I think Sanchez is amazing. This video is not going to be looking at the goalkeepers, but you can kind of already get my thoughts in, who are the best players at different price points. And I think Sanchez is a steal in a similar way to how Colwill is for the start of the season. Lacroix is also just a fantastic pick. I've actually got him as the third green pick here as well. He's someone who just has amazing CBIT, slightly better than Chris Richards, and probably, I think, top 2 or top 3 in terms of CBIT per 90 within the entire league. So that just shows you how impressive that is. And I think that probably justifies the 0.5 million gap, especially since you can sort of price in nailedness for Lacroix. And that's all I really have to say. He's got not too amazing sort of numbers, but the underlying stats for almost the attacking edge is there, right? When you look at the top players within the game here in NPXG per 90, when I'm talking center backs and set piece threats, Lacroix is one of them, Milenkovic is one of them, and Gabriel is clearly one of them as well. So these are the types of players that I think are very, very interesting at this moment in time. Aina is actually someone that I have a little bit lower. And as you can see, it's partially because he's worse at CBIT, worse underlying stats. And yes, of course, he did a lot of points in FPL last season, but I think it's about asking how reproducible some of the points are. With really, really poor sort of expected goal involvement, I think Milenkovic is just better, right? Because the expected goal involvement's there. So you can think it's a little bit more reproducible for him to get attacking returns. And both of them kind of have somewhat some par CBIT. And then on the other hand of the table is just amazing. And we'll look at him in a moment. Milenko, I think, sort of falls into that same tier. I wouldn't say too much. I think actually the opening expected clean sheets for both teams here in terms of Nottingham Forest and Everton are very, very similar. So I would actually kind of classify these two players as very similar. Robinson, for me, is just someone that I wouldn't really start the season with. I think the CBIT numbers are actually nice. I think his sort of underlying stats have never been that good. I think he vastly overperformed last season. And if I had to take a bet, I don't think he's going to get 10 assists again this season or above. And I'm happy to take that sort of bet. You can kind of see that he was probably one of the largest overperformers last season, but the overperformance isn't due to sort of expect like finishing, for example. It was actually more so just due to the amount of assists that he was racking up, which I think, once again, as I said, is not reproducible just based on the XAG per 90 being so poor. In the next tier on the 5.5, I would actually love to mention that Murillo and Tarkowski, I think, are still somewhat underpriced, right? The CBIT per 90 numbers are there, expected clean sheet numbers are there. So when I kind of compare it to Aina and Mikalenko, I actually think these players are worth their price, because once you sort of move up the edge in terms of the sort of average in CBIT, if you kind of think about it as a bit of a normal distribution, I think there's so much more probability of you actually racking up those 2 points per game. And I think that does really price in to these two players. And so I think that is very, very much valuable. As far as Milenkovic, he has that attacking threat still, but I think the CBIT's going to bite into that a little bit. So I think I kind of have him as a yellow pick. My two favorite defenders, as you can see from Nottingham Forest, are going to be Nico Williams and Murillo. And I'm happy to be wrong on that. But those are my thoughts. Milenkovic still is the third best pick, I think. And I don't think he's too far apart from, let's say, Murillo or Tarkowski. But it's just about, if you kind of look at the gap of the NPXG per 90, that's not going to take into account, or that's not going to, I would say, supersede, for example, the gap in CBIT per 90, which just gives you that guarantee of return that much more often. As far as the next 5.5 options, I think Mateus Nunes is good. He might actually be a yellow pick, because I think Rico Lewis really struggled to almost keep his spot within the team last season. He was only really playing games where Mateus Nunes couldn't play, and Nunes has been able to almost nail down that right back position. But do I really like City's opening fixtures, and is there still a possibility for rotation to hurt? And does Mateus Nunes get any CBIT for 90? Not really. So on these numbers and on this basis, I just don't think he's an amazing pick right now. And I really think that this sort of CBIT per 90 change has dramatically hurt teams like City and Arsenal the most. And I've fundamentally sort of reevaluated how important the players are. And as you can see, if you go to my first draft, I said big at the back is back. But I think big at the back is a little bit back in a different way. And I think I have now more of an appreciation just looking at sort of how the numbers have panned out in terms of the additional points per season, what that sort of means for expected points per match for a lot of these sorts of players. I think I'm very pro CBIT. And as you can see, it's sort of reflected into Nunez dropping in estimations, Ruben dropping in estimations. Timber, I think, can probably be rotated a bit. So especially with the CBIT changes, I don't think he's that necessary. Virgil, I still think is wonderful, right? Because as someone who's actually really good at CBIT per 90, someone who still should get really good expected clean sheet numbers, and actually just has always been very consistently a good aerial threat, even though his underlying stats last season weren't anything to sort of call home about, I think Virgil's still great. Kukure was actually someone who I think was transformational last season in terms of sort of becoming much more of an attacking threat. So when I actually look at his underlying stats, I kind of think that there was a bit of a switch flipped last season, very much to like the previous season where Kukure has suddenly shown a lot as a 1v1 defender. I think he's taken a transformational step under Enzo Maresca to be a much more attacking player. Now, my only concern with Kukure is the sort of aspect of, if Gusto's going to play more games, Kukure is going to play more of that sort of back three, sort of left center back type role where he'll probably get chances to score, but they won't be necessarily from open play. So if I think about a game, let's say versus Palmeiras, for example, he was playing left center back most of that match. Gusto was actually someone who was actually, consistently in good attacking positions, playing off of a right center mid partnership. And then actually Kukure was someone who only got 2 shots, which is a lot per game, but actually they were both from sort of corner kick routines where he was allowed to take a pot shot from distance, as opposed to sort of what he usually does within matches when he's allowed to play a little bit more expansively, where he will find himself naturally within the box to score an open play. For example, like that header he did versus Man United, which is just brilliant. Saliba has also dropped a little bit in my estimations because of this. I think that that's going to hurt a little bit. I think the opening Arsenal fixtures are good because they're an amazing defense, but not great. And so that's kind of why my estimations for Kukure have dropped a bit. I think Kukure is a little bit overpriced. I think the expected clean sheets, despite Chelsea's fixtures being that good, is still going to be lower than some of the other teams that have really quality defenses like Liverpool and Arsenal ultimately. With Guardiola, I think that him playing left center back is going to bite into it. I think less CBIT's going to bite into it. I also think that, ultimately, City's defense is something that was still quite weak last season. I can't expect that they're going to transformationally be much better than a Liverpool or an Arsenal to start the season. So he's where he's at. And there's no Gabriel in this cheat sheet because I actually didn't even see him in the friendly in the previous match, so can't really see Gabriel. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe in game week 1 he just gets stuck in. But for now, I guess Gabriel would probably be in the same position as Saliba in the cheat sheet. But if we think he's definitely going to start in game week 1, would probably be a green pick right now. Just a sort of tidbit there. As far as Ait Nuri, I think he should really be starting the games in the start of the season. But I'm happy to be wrong, right? And I think ultimately the thing with Pep is things can change very, very quickly with Pep. And we know that, I think, for anyone buying into Itinerary knows that the negative or the con here is that he could be subbed off at 60 minutes and suddenly there's a run of games where Guardiola just plays left back, or, Itinerary can still be really, really good, but still might, for example, be prone to early substitutions and that sort of thing, with maybe Pep willing to, I guess, play Nico O'Reilly, for example, for 15, 30 minutes. I didn't see any of that, to be honest, in the Club World Cup, which is actually why I have this sort of confidence in general with Itinerary being a pick. So I think he's actually still going to be a yellow pick to start the season. I'm happy to be wrong in terms of the minutes, but I think his minutes look quite safe. It's just that the idea that CBIT has been priced into the game, I just don't think it's that exhilarating to sort of go with Itinerary within a draft. And with Frimpong and Kirkus, I am very much still worried about these kind of numbers, right? Kirkus's CBIT numbers were very high, but he was playing at Bournemouth last season. This is going to change as a Liverpool player. But actually, I will say that Liverpool actually do still participate reasonably within CBIT, even though when you look at those team strength lists at the start, it wasn't great, right? Just looking at some of the comparable sort of left back options for Liverpool, like a Tsimikas or a Robertson last season, the numbers weren't great, but maybe Kirkus is just generally better at being able to rack up things like CBIT. So I think, there's a little bit of leeway there. With Frimpong, I think those numbers can change once again, but maybe his role will also be very fundamentally different. His attacking numbers are there, right? And that's why Frimpong and Itinerary are so clearly almost pigeonholed as extremely attacking players. And I think for a very, very good reason. The only thing I would say is these are probably players that I'd want to invest into a little bit later into the game. And that's pretty much it. I think the 5.5 million price point or the 5 million price point right now interests me the most. And there's a lot of rotation options at 4.5 that I think are just absolute steals at that price point. And depending on runs of games, depending on how we sort of evaluate changes in terms of tactical team structures and obviously individual players who are really good at accumulating CBIT, the cheat sheet will change as the season goes along. So let's see for now. I think I'm a little bit more down and big at the back in terms of spending the 6 million on the 6 million players, but I think there's definitely scope to spend a lot of money in terms of those 5.5 million CBIT monsters, or even some of the ones in the 5 million price bracket, like a Lacroix, like a Nico Williams. And those are my early thoughts for the Game Week 1 Defenders. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.